I've lived on the same piece of land for over 5 decades. It's a humble spread, 63 acres of rolling hills, a fishing pond that's seen 3 generations of grandkids, and a red barn older than some counties. My name's Walter Jennings, and around here folks just call me Walt. I'm not the kind of man who looks for trouble, but I sure as hell don't let it walk across my fence line and take what's mine. Last spring, I started noticing something odd. Surveyor flags popped up near the southern fence line of my property, the one that butted up against the Oak Hill Estates HOA. Now, that HOA had always been a thorny bunch, full of folks who moved in from the city and thought living near pasture land gave them some kind of authority over it. Their president, a woman named Karen Beasley, yeah, a real-life Karen, was notorious for writing letters about the smell of cow manure, the crowing of my rooster, and even the color of my barn roof. But those flags? Those weren't letters. Those were stakes in the ground, and I knew something was coming. I drove my ATV down to the boundary line and followed the little orange flags for about a quarter mile. That's when I saw 2 men in hard hats and reflective vests standing next to a backhoe. They were staring at blueprints, talking about drainage systems. When I asked what they were doing on my land, they looked surprised. One of them said, "Sir, this parcel was purchased by Oak Hill Development last week. We've been contracted to start grading for a community garden." I nearly laughed. Purchased by who? This land's mine. Been mine since 1971. Got the deed hanging above my fireplace. The guy looked nervous. He pulled a folded paper from his vest. It was a purchase order. Right there in bold font, it said, Lot 24, Oak Hill Extension, sold by Oak Hill HOA. "That ain't just wrong," I said slowly. "That's illegal." And that's how it started. Within 2 days, I had code enforcers sniffing around my tool shed, citing me for old tractors, weeds taller than 6 inches, and a chicken coop that hadn't moved in years. Karen showed up on my porch wearing a smile that'd make a snake nervous. She told me the land sale was final, that I must have been mistaken about where my property line fell, and if I didn't want more issues, I should stop interfering with their plans. "You step 1 inch past your side," she warned, wagging a perfectly manicured finger, "and I'll have the sheriff write you up for trespassing." I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Then you better have a whole damn stack of citations ready, because I ain't backing off 1 inch. What Karen and her HOA didn't know was that I had everything documented. Survey maps, boundary plats, aerial photographs dating back to the 80s. Heck, even a video of my grandson fishing in that very corner they claimed they'd bought. But I didn't go screaming into court just yet. I waited. Because if there's one thing you learn living off the land, it's patience. That Friday night, I invited my nephew Dean over. He's a lawyer out of Austin with a mean streak for property law. We sat at my kitchen table, spread out every deed and document I had, and by midnight, Dean had what he called a legal hammer. "Walt," he said, tapping a map, "not only did they try to sell land they don't own, but they falsified documents to do it. That's fraud, criminal, civil, the whole barrel." I leaned back, heart pounding like a diesel engine. This wasn't just a fight for my land. This was war. By the following Monday, Dean had already filed a cease and desist letter to both the Oak Hill HOA and their development partner. He made sure to copy the county clerk, the sheriff's office, and the zoning commission, just to let the whole town know we weren't playing around. It stopped the bulldozers cold, but it didn't stop the storm. Karen showed up again, and this time she brought a deputy. Her heels clicked like gunshots on my gravel driveway as she marched up with her usual smug grin. The deputy looked uneasy, like he knew he'd been dragged into a mess. "Mr. Jennings," she barked, "you are interfering with HOA-sanctioned development. You are trespassing on their land." I didn't even stand up from my porch rocker. I reached behind me, handed the folder to the deputy, and said, "That's my deed. Been recorded since 1971 and recertified every 10 years. You're welcome to take a look." He opened it, read, his brows lifted. Karen leaned over his shoulder, huffed, then turned red. This can't be right. The HOA's filing says this plot is part of Oak Hill Extension. The deputy closed the folder slowly. Ma'am, this deed's clean. If there's a dispute, it's civil, not criminal. You'll have to take it up with a judge. Karen spun on her heel and stomped away without a word. The deputy gave me a nod. Sorry, Walt. You know how she gets. I surely do, I said, tipping my hat. But I wasn't celebrating yet. A week later, a formal notice arrived. The HOA was suing me for interference with HOA property, defamation of the board, and emotional distress. Dean laughed when he read it. Oh, they've really stepped in it now, he said. Not only is this going to get tossed, we're going to turn this into a countersuit and drag every board member into court. And that's exactly what we did. We filed our own suit. Fraud, slander, harassment, attempted illegal transfer of property, and mental anguish. Dean even pulled in a land use expert to testify. But we didn't stop there. While Karen was busy throwing tantrums in court filings, I was setting a bigger trap. You see, during Dean's research, we uncovered something they really didn't want us to find. The HOA had over-leveraged itself. Turns out, they had taken a line of credit to expand the clubhouse and upgrade their tennis courts. The collateral? Their own greenbelt and clubhouse property, mortgaged to a private lender in Houston, a lender that Dean just so happened to have worked with before. The HOA had missed payments. They were in default. The foreclosure was already underway. So Dean made an offer. Silent, legal, clean. By the time the court date arrived, I legally owned the HOA's most prized asset, their community clubhouse, tennis court, and the shared lot used for events and meetings, and no one saw it coming. In court, Dean presented aerial photographs of the property line from county records, the original deed, a statement from the county surveyor, and a forensic signature analyst who confirmed that Karen had signed off on a sale without owning the land. Karen sat there fuming, looking like someone just stole her Christmas. The judge leaned forward, squinted at the evidence, then said, "Let me get this straight. You tried to sell a man's property that you never owned, then sued him when he stopped you?" Karen opened her mouth. Dean raised a hand. "Your Honor, if I may, here's video footage of Ms. Beasley trespassing and threatening my client on his property." The judge didn't even need to see the rest. She ruled in our favor on every count. The HOA was ordered to pay legal damages, and a public correction was mandated through the city newsletter and HOA mailing list, but that wasn't even the good part. The very next week, I posted a notice on the front door of their fancy community clubhouse. Property under new ownership. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Karen came charging up to my porch again, this time sputtering incoherent nonsense. "You can't do this! You can't own our HOA land!" "Oh, but I do," I said, holding up the deed. "Same way you thought you owned mine. Funny how that works." Neighbors started noticing. The ones who had always silently hated Karen began asking questions. One man even stopped by and asked if I'd consider turning the tennis court into a community garden for everyone, not just HOA members. I told him I'd think about it. But deep down, I already had bigger plans. The feedlot stirred up more than just dust and cow stench. Within a week, the HOA email list exploded with complaints. Parents didn't want their kids playing by the tennis court anymore. Pool parties were canceled. Karen called an emergency board meeting, but what she didn't know was that I was already 5 steps ahead. See, back when Dean and I were digging through legal records, we discovered something interesting. Turns out, the HOA was in financial trouble. They'd defaulted on a short-term loan to build a new playground and tennis gazebo. To secure that loan, they'd used their undeveloped community parcels, specifically the common-use greenbelt and the event center, as collateral. The lender? A property management company in Houston. Dean smiled when he saw it. "We know that guy." We made a few calls. That loan had gone into default 6 months ago. The lender was preparing to foreclose on the property. Dean brokered the deal, and within 3 weeks, I became the silent owner of Oak Hill HOA's Greenbelt parking lot and community center, the very heart of their operation. And then I made it public. I called a town hall. Most of the HOA residents showed up thinking it was another Karen-led protest. When I walked onto the stage with Dean, the room got quiet. Then I showed them the ownership papers. Karen stood up, fuming. His is illegal. You can't just buy our land. Dean handed her a printed foreclosure notice. Actually, we can, and we did. You should have read the loan agreement. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. I stepped forward. Now listen here. I don't want to ruin your community, but your HOA nearly ruined me. You voted in a board that tried to steal my land, lie about it, and silence me. That board just lost its headquarters. One man stood up. So what happens now? That depends on you, I said. You can vote to dissolve the HOA and we'll work out a shared use agreement for the community space. Or you can keep letting Karen and her cronies run the show, with no building, no parking lot, and no access. The vote happened right there in the room. Over 80% voted to dissolve the HOA. Karen stormed out before it was even over. Within weeks, the old HOA signs came down. Neighbors started waving at me again. A few even came by to thank me. Some of them had been afraid to speak up for years. Turns out Karen had fined an elderly widow for wind chimes and another couple for planting tulips outside their walkway. As for Karen, she tried to sue me personally. It got thrown out in less than a day. Dean didn't even have to show up. I eventually donated a portion of the land I'd bought back to the town as a public park. The rest I leased to a local farmers market cooperative. And the smell of cows, still there, still strong. Sometimes I sit on my porch, sip my coffee, and watch the sunrise over the very corner of my land that Karen once tried to sell out from under me. Let me tell you something, friend. You don't mess with a man's land, not in Texas, not anywhere. And if you ever do, well, you better hope he ain't got a nephew with a law degree and a memory like a steel trap. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stick around. I've got more wild tales coming your way.